The cards hit the table with a finality that made Declan O'Reilly's stomach turn, not from the whiskey he had been nursing all night, but from the realization of what he had just done. The smoky interior of the Lucky Dollar Saloon in Lordsburg, New Mexico territory, seemed to close in around him as the man across the table, a rail baron named Chester Vaughn, pushed a crumpled piece of paper toward him with a yellowed grin that revealed more gaps than teeth. "Well now, Cowboy, looks like you just won yourself more than you bargained for," Chester said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "That there is a debt marker, signed and witnessed. My daughter Zara owes me $1,500, money I loaned her dead husband for a ranch that went belly up. Since she cannot pay, and you just won that debt fair and square, she is yours. Got the marriage certificate already drawn up and everything, just waiting for signatures." Declan stared at the paper like it might bite him. This was 1882, and he had seen some strange wagers in his 30 years, but never anything like this. He had been playing poker to win enough money to buy a string of horses for his ranch, not to acquire a wife like she was a piece of property to be traded. The very notion made his skin crawl. Yet here sat Chester Vaughn, perfectly serious, perfectly sober, and perfectly within his legal rights according to the twisted logic of debt collection. "You cannot be serious," Declan said, his voice low and gravelly from years of trail dust and campfire smoke. "A man cannot just gamble away his own daughter. It is not her I am gambling, son. It is her debt. Big difference in the eyes of the law. She signed papers making her responsible for that money when her husband died. I hold those papers. You won them. Simple as that." Chester stood up, his considerable bulk making the chair scrape loudly against the wooden floor. "She is staying at the boarding house on 3rd Street, Mrs. Henderson's place. You got until noon tomorrow to claim her, or the debt reverts back to me, and she goes to work in one of the less respectable establishments to pay what she owes. Your choice, Cowboy." The other men at the table had gone quiet, their faces showing varying degrees of discomfort and morbid curiosity. Declan looked down at his cards again, the winning hand of aces and eights that would forever be burned into his memory. He thought about walking away, about letting this whole sordid situation resolve itself without his involvement. But then he thought about what Chester had said. A woman, working in a brothel to pay off her dead husband's debts. That did not sit right with him, not one bit. "I will talk to her," Declan said finally, picking up the paper and folding it carefully. "But I am not going to force anyone into anything they do not want." Chester laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling down a hillside. "You are a better man than most, O'Reilly. But mark my words, she does not have a choice. It is you or the alternative, and trust me when I say the alternative is much worse." Declan left the saloon with the paper burning a hole in his vest pocket, and the first rays of false dawn just starting to lighten the eastern sky. Lordsburg was quiet at this hour, just a few dogs barking in the distance and the occasional stamp of a horse in one of the livery stables. He had been in this town for 3 days, selling off a herd of cattle he had driven up from his ranch near Silver City, and he had planned to head back home this very morning. Now those plans had gone sideways in the most unexpected way possible. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was a 2-story affair with peeling white paint and a front porch that sagged slightly in the middle. Declan stood outside for a long moment, trying to figure out what exactly he was going to say. How did a man explain to a woman that he had won the right to marry her in a card game? There was no gentle way to approach this situation, no words that would make it sound any less insane than it actually was. He knocked on the door, and after a few minutes, a gray-haired woman in a nightcap and robe appeared, holding a lamp that cast dancing shadows across her suspicious face. "Mrs. Henderson, my name is Declan O'Reilly. I need to speak with Zara Vaughn. It is urgent." The woman's expression shifted from suspicion to something closer to pity. "You are the one, then. Chester was here earlier, told her what happened. She is in room 4, top of the stairs. Fair warning, young man. She has been crying for the past hour, and she has access to a rather large carpet bag that she is not afraid to swing at a person's head." Declan climbed the narrow staircase, each step creaking under his boots. The hallway smelled of lye soap and old wood, and a thin line of lamplight showed under the door marked with a tarnished brass number 4. He knocked softly, then stepped back, suddenly aware of how he must look and smell after a night of cards and whiskey. "Go away," came a voice from inside, thick with tears but carrying an edge of steel that surprised him. "Miss Vaughn, my name is Declan O'Reilly. I know what happened tonight and I know how this must sound, but I need to talk to you, please." There was a long silence, then the sound of footsteps. The door opened just a crack, revealing a sliver of a woman's face. What Declan could see made him catch his breath. Even with red-rimmed eyes and tear-stained cheeks, Zara Vaughn was beautiful. She had dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, eyes the color of honey in sunlight, and a face that could have graced a painting in some fancy Eastern gallery. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steadier now but still carrying the weight of exhaustion and despair. "I want to talk." "That is all. Just talk. I'm not here to force you into anything or to make demands. I just think we need to figure this out together because neither of us asked for this situation." The door opened wider and Zara stepped back, gesturing for him to enter. The room was small and sparsely furnished, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair by the window. Zara moved to stand by that window, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together through sheer force of will. "My father is a bastard," she said flatly. "In case you were wondering. He loaned my husband James that money knowing full well that James was a dreamer with no head for business. When the ranch failed and James died, my father swooped in like a vulture and made me sign papers saying I would repay every cent. I should have known he would find some way to profit from my misery." Declan stayed near the door, giving her space. "I am sorry for your loss, and I am sorry for what happened tonight. I had no idea Chester was going to put that debt on the table. If I had known, I never would have stayed in the game." She turned to look at him, really look at him, her eyes searching his face. "But you won. And now, according to the law and my father's twisted sense of business, you own that debt, which means you own me in a manner of speaking." "I do not own anyone," Declan said firmly. "And I am not going to pretend that I do, but I will be honest with you about the situation. Chester said if I do not claim this marriage agreement by noon today, the debt goes back to him and he is going to force you to work in a brothel to pay it off." I do not know if he was bluffing or not, but I do not want to take that chance. Zara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He was not bluffing. My father has been threatening me with exactly that for the past 6 months. He wants me gone, wants me out of his hair so he can go back to his whiskey and his whores without feeling guilty about leaving his daughter destitute." "Then here is what I am proposing," Declan said, moving slowly to the chair and sitting down so they could talk on more equal footing. "We go through with this marriage, on paper only if that is what you want. I have a ranch about 2 days' ride from here near Silver City. It is not much, but it is mine free and clear. You can come live there, have your own room, your own space. No expectations, no demands. Just a safe place to be until we figure out a better solution." "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" Zara asked, suspicion clear in her voice. "Peace of mind, I suppose. the knowledge that I did not leave a woman in a terrible situation when I had the means to help. Declan met her gaze steadily. Look, I know this is not romantic or even sensible from your perspective. You do not know me, you have no reason to trust me, but I am giving you my word as honestly as I can. I will not force myself on you. I will not make demands. You will be safe. Zara studied him for a long moment, and Declan tried to imagine what she was seeing. He was tall and lean from years of hard work, with dark hair that needed a cut and eyes that his mother used to say were the color of a stormy sky. He had a few scars, a slightly crooked nose from a breaking that had not set quite right, and hands that were calloused from rope and reins. He was not handsome in the classical sense, but he was honest, and he hoped that showed in his face. "If I say no," she asked quietly, "then I tear up that paper and you never see me again. But then you will have to deal with your father, and from what I have seen of Chester Vaughn, that is not a pleasant prospect." "No," Zara agreed, turning back to the window where the sky was growing lighter by the minute. "It is not pleasant at all. He beat my mother, drank away 3 fortunes, and has been nothing but cruel to me since the day I was born. The only reason I came back to Lordsburg after James died was because I had nowhere else to go, and I thought maybe, just maybe, he would help his own daughter. I was wrong." Declan stood up slowly, sensing that she needed to make this decision without feeling pressured. "I am staying at the livery stable, sleeping in the loft. If you decide you want to take me up on my offer, come find me before noon. If not, I will understand and I will not bother you again." He made it to the door before she spoke again. "Wait." He turned, and she was facing him now, her chin lifted in determination even though her hands were shaking. "I will do it. I will marry you. But I want you to know that I do not come with any illusions about love or happy endings. I married for love once and it left me destitute and alone. This time I am being practical, nothing more." "Fair enough," Declan said, something in his chest tightening at the pain in her voice. "When do you want to do this?" "Now, before I lose my nerve. There is a justice of the peace who lives above the general store. He owes my father money, so he will do whatever Chester tells him. We can get it done before sunrise, and be out of town before my father even wakes up from his drunken stupor." They walked through the quiet streets of Lordsburg together, a strange pair in the pre-dawn darkness. Declan kept a respectful distance, and Zara walked with her carpetbag clutched in both hands like a shield. The justice of the peace, a nervous little man named Hartley, answered their knock with obvious reluctance, but his reluctance turned to resignation when he saw the paper Declan produced with Chester's signature. The ceremony was brief and entirely without romance. Hartley mumbled through the words while his wife stood as witness, still in her nightgown and looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. When it came time to kiss the bride, Declan simply offered Zara his hand, which she shook formally, her palm cold and slightly damp against his. They left Lordsburg as the sun broke over the Pyramid Mountains to the east, riding double on Declan's horse since Zara had no mount of her own. She sat in front of him, stiff and uncomfortable, clearly not used to being so close to a man she did not know. Declan kept his arms loose on either side of her, holding the reins but trying not to crowd her, and for the first few miles, neither of them spoke. It was Zara who finally broke the silence as they followed the trail south toward the Gila River. "What kind of ranch do you have?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of hoofbeats. "Cattle mostly, though I have been thinking about getting into horses. I have about 300 head spread across 1,200 acres. It is hard work, especially since I lost my partner last year to a riding accident, but it is a good life. Honest work, clean air, and nobody to answer to but myself. Do you have help? Ranch hands, a cook?" I have two men who work for me, Miguel and his son Carlos. They live in the bunkhouse on the property. Miguel's wife passed a few years back, so Carlos does most of the cooking, though I warn you, it is pretty basic fare. Beans, bacon, cornbread, nothing fancy. I can cook, Zara said, and there was a note of something almost like pride in her voice. My mother taught me before she died. I can make a decent meal out of just about anything. That is a useful skill out here, Declan said, and he felt her relax just slightly against him. They rode in silence for a while longer, and as the sun climbed higher, the heat began to build. Declan stopped by a creek to let the horse drink, and to give them both a chance to stretch. Zara moved away immediately, walking to the edge of the water and splashing some on her face and neck. She had changed before they left town, trading her dress for a more practical split skirt and blouse, but she still looked out of place in the rough landscape of southern New Mexico. "Are you hungry?" Declan asked, pulling some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag. "Starving, actually," Zara admitted, coming to sit on a rock near where he was standing. "I have not eaten since yesterday morning." He handed her the food and she ate without complaint, even though he knew it was poor fare compared to what she was probably used to. They sat in companionable silence, and Declan found himself studying her when he thought she was not looking. In the daylight, she was even more striking than she had been in the dim lamplight of the boarding house. Her skin was fair but sun-touched, suggesting she had not always lived a sheltered life. Her hands, when she reached for the canteen of water, showed the remnants of calluses, like she had once done hard work but had been away from it for a while. "What are you thinking?" she asked suddenly, catching him looking. "I was thinking that you have worked with your hands before. Those are not the hands of a lady who has only ever poured tea and arranged flowers." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "My mother was a laundress before she married my father. She taught me the trade when I was young, before my father made his first fortune in railroads and decided we were too good for such menial work. When I married James and we started the ranch, I went back to it. Took in washing from the miners and the soldiers at Fort Bayard. It helped pay the bills, at least until James made some bad investments and the ranch started losing money faster than I could earn it." "There is no shame in honest work," Declan said. "Tell that to my father," Zara replied, her voice bitter. "He was furious when he found out I was taking in laundry. Said it made him look bad, like he could not provide for his own daughter. Never mind that he had not sent me a single dollar since I got married." They mounted up again and continued south, following the trail that wound through the high desert country. Declan pointed out landmarks as they passed them, telling her about the ranches they were passing and the families who owned them. He kept up a steady stream of information, partly to help her get her bearings and partly to fill the awkward silence that kept threatening to settle between them. As afternoon turned to evening, they stopped to make camp in a small grove of cottonwood trees near a seasonal creek. Declan took care of the horse while Zara gathered deadwood for a fire. He was impressed by how quickly she moved, how efficiently she stacked the wood and prepared the fire pit. This was not a woman who was afraid of hard work, whatever her current circumstances might suggest. They ate more jerky and hardtack along with some canned peaches Declan had been saving for a special occasion. It seemed right to share them tonight, this strange wedding night that was not really a wedding night at all. Zara ate the peaches slowly, savoring each bite, and Declan found himself charmed by the look of simple pleasure on her face. "Thank you," she said when she had finished. "I have not had peaches in over a year. James used to love them, but they were expensive and we could rarely afford such luxuries." "You must have loved him very much," Declan said gently. Zara looked into the fire, her expression unreadable. "I thought I did, or maybe I loved the idea of him." James was handsome and charming and full of big dreams. He was going to build the biggest ranch in New Mexico. We were going to have 12 children and live happily ever after. But dreams do not pay bills, and charm does not keep a ranch running. By the end, I think I resented him more than I loved him, which makes me feel terrible because he died before we could fix what was broken between us. That is a heavy burden to carry, Declan said. Yes, she agreed quietly. It is. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle and the distant call of a coyote. Declan had laid out his bedroll on one side of the fire and had given Zara his only blanket for the other side. He would make do with his coat, which would be enough for a late summer night in New Mexico. "Can I ask you something?" Zara said suddenly. "Of course. Why are you not married already? You are what, 30, 35? That is old for a bachelor out here." 30, Declan confirmed. "And I suppose the honest answer is that I have never met anyone who made me want to settle down. I have been focused on building the ranch, on making something of myself. Romance seemed like a distraction I could not afford." "And now you are married to a complete stranger," Zara said, and there was the faintest hint of amusement in her voice. "How is that for irony?" "Life has a funny way of working out," Declan agreed. "Though I will admit, this is not how I saw my life going when I woke up yesterday morning." "Join the club," Zara said, lying back on the bedroll and staring up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Yesterday morning I thought I was going to end up in a brothel. Tonight I am married to a cowboy I just met and heading to a ranch I have never seen." If someone had told me this was going to happen, I would have called them crazy. "Are you scared?" Declan asked. She thought about it for a moment before answering. "No, not scared exactly. Uncertain, maybe. Worried that I am making another mistake, but not scared." "You have given me no reason to be scared of you." "I am glad," Declan said, "because I meant what I said earlier. You are safe with me. Always." He saw her turn her head to look at him across the fire, and something in her expression softened. "I believe you," she said quietly. "Which is strange, because I did not think I would ever trust a man again after James. But I believe you." They talked for a while longer, sharing small details about their lives. Declan told her about growing up in Texas, about his parents who had died in a cholera outbreak when he was 20, about his decision to move to New Mexico and start fresh. Zara told him about her mother, who had been kind and gentle and completely crushed by her marriage to Chester Vaughn. She told him about her childhood, which had alternated between periods of relative wealth, when her father was flush with cash, and periods of desperate poverty, when his business ventures failed. As the fire burned down to embers, Zara's voice grew softer and her answers shorter. Declan realized she was falling asleep, exhausted by the emotional turmoil of the past 24 hours. He stood quietly and moved to add a bit more wood to the fire, then settled down on his own bedroll, using his saddle as a pillow. He lay there for a long time, staring up at the stars and thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. He had a wife now, a real, legal wife, even if the marriage was only on paper. She was sleeping just a few feet away, this woman he had known for less than 12 hours, and yet he already felt a strange sense of protectiveness toward her. Maybe it was because he had seen the vulnerability in her eyes when she talked about her father. Maybe it was because he understood what it felt like to be alone in the world with no one to count on but yourself. Or maybe, a small voice in the back of his mind suggested, it was because she was beautiful and brave and more interesting than anyone he had met in years. He pushed that thought away firmly. She had made it clear that she was not looking for love, that this was a practical arrangement and nothing more. He needed to respect that, no matter what strange feelings might be stirring in his chest. Sleep came eventually, though it was restless and full of strange dreams. He woke before dawn to find Zara already up, rekindling the fire and heating water in his small cooking pot. She looked over at him as he sat up, and he was struck again by how lovely she was in the soft morning light. "I hope you do not mind," she said. "I found some coffee in your pack and thought we could both use a cup. Mind, I am grateful. I am useless until I have had my morning coffee." She smiled, a real smile this time, and Declan felt his heart do something strange in his chest. He stood and went to check on the horse, giving himself a moment to collect his thoughts. This was dangerous territory he was wandering into. He could not afford to develop real feelings for a woman who had been clear about her emotional unavailability. But even as he told himself this, he knew it was already too late. Something about Zara Vaughn, now Zara O'Reilly, had gotten under his skin. Maybe it was her strength in the face of terrible circumstances. Maybe it was the way she did not complain even though she had every right to. Maybe it was simply the fact that she was the first person in years who made him want to be a better man. They rode out as the sun rose, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Zara seemed more relaxed today, leaning back against him slightly as they rode instead of holding herself rigidly apart. They talked more easily too, swapping stories and asking questions. Declan learned that she loved to read, but had been forced to sell most of her books to pay debts. She learned that he had a weakness for peppermint candy and could play the harmonica, though not very well. By midday, they had reached the Gila River and followed it west toward Silver City. The landscape was greener here, with more trees and better grass for grazing. Declan pointed out where his property began, marked by a simple fence line that stretched as far as the eye could see. 1,200 acres, Zara breathed. That is enormous. It is enough to make a good living if you work hard and the weather cooperates, Declan said. The house is another hour from here, up in the foothills where there is a spring that never runs dry. They rode on, and Declan found himself nervous in a way he had not expected. What would she think of his house? Would she find it too rough, too basic? He had built it himself with help from Miguel and Carlos, and while it was sturdy and weatherproof, it was not fancy by any stretch of the imagination. The house came into view as they crested a small rise. It was a simple structure made of adobe with a wooden porch running along the front. There was a barn nearby and the bunkhouse where Miguel and Carlos lived. Chickens scratched in the yard, and a few cattle could be seen grazing on the hillside beyond. Declan felt Zara stiffen slightly in front of him, and his heart sank. She hated it. Of course she hated it. It was primitive compared to what she had probably expected, but then she said, "It is beautiful. It looks like a home." The relief that flooded through him was almost overwhelming. "You really think so?" "I do. It is exactly the kind of place James and I dreamed about when we first got married, before everything went wrong. Small enough to feel cozy, but big enough to grow into." They rode into the yard and were immediately greeted by two men emerging from the barn. Miguel was in his 50s, weathered and strong, with a thick mustache and kind eyes. His son Carlos was in his early 20s, lean and energetic with his father's smile. Both men stopped dead when they saw Zara sitting in front of Declan, their expressions shifting from surprise to curiosity. "Miguel, Carlos, I would like you to meet Zara. She is my wife. We got married yesterday in Lordsburg." If Miguel and Carlos were shocked by this announcement, they hid it well. Miguel stepped forward and removed his hat, giving Zara a respectful nod. "Senora O'Reilly, welcome. We are very happy to have you here." Carlos echoed his father's greeting, though his eyes were full of questions he was too polite to ask. Declan dismounted and then helped Zara down, his hands lingering perhaps a moment too long on her waist. "I know this is sudden," Declan said to his men. "I will explain everything later. But for now, could one of you take care of the horse while I show Zara around?" "Of course, boss," Miguel said, taking the reins. Carlos disappeared into the barn and Declan led Zara toward the house. The interior was dim and cool after the bright sunshine outside. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a simple table with chairs. There were 2 doors leading off the main room, one to Declan's bedroom and one to what had been a storage room until now. "This is yours," Declan said, opening the door to the storage room. It was small and currently full of boxes and supplies, but it had a window that looked out over the valley and good ventilation. "I know it is not much right now, but I can move all this stuff out and we can get you a proper bed and whatever else you need. There is a furniture maker in Silver City who does good work." Zara stepped into the room and looked around, her expression thoughtful. "It is perfect. I can help move the boxes if you show me where they should go, and I do not need anything fancy, just a bed and maybe a chest for my clothes." "You should have more than that," Declan protested. "A dresser, a mirror, a rug for the floor, curtains for the window. This is your room, your space. It should be comfortable." She turned to look at him, and something in her expression had shifted. "You are being very kind to me." "Kinder than you need to be for what is essentially a business arrangement." "Maybe I am not very good at treating people like business transactions," Declan said honestly. "You are my wife, paper or not. That means something to me." They stood there in the small room, looking at each other, and the air between them seemed charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Then Zara broke the moment by turning back to survey the room. "I will need a broom. This place is dusty." They spent the rest of the afternoon making the room habitable. Declan moved boxes to the barn while Zara swept and scrubbed. Miguel appeared with an old bed frame he had been storing in the bunkhouse, and together he and Declan set it up. Carlos contributed a quilt his grandmother had made, which he presented to Zara with a shy smile. "My abuela would want you to have this," he said. "She always said a house is not a home without a woman to care for it." "Thank you," Zara said, taking the quilt and running her fingers over the careful stitching. "It is beautiful. I will treasure it." By evening, the room was transformed. The bed was made with the quilt and some sheets Declan had produced from somewhere. The boxes were gone, and Zara's few possessions were arranged neatly on a simple shelf. It was Spartan but clean, and when Zara stood in the doorway looking in, she smiled. "It is mine," she said softly. "I have not had anything that was truly mine in such a long time." Dinner that night was a communal affair, with Miguel and Carlos joining them at the table in the main house. Carlos had made his specialty, a spicy beef stew with beans and cornbread, and Zara ate with genuine enthusiasm. "This is delicious," she told Carlos. "You have to teach me how you make this." Carlos beamed with pride, and Declan felt a surge of affection for his young cook. Carlos had lost his mother when he was just 15 and had been devastated by her death. Seeing him smile so genuinely now reminded Declan of why he valued his little makeshift family so much. After dinner, Miguel and Carlos excused themselves and headed back to the bunkhouse. Declan started to clear the table, but Zara shooed him away. "I can do this." "You have been riding for 2 days straight. Go sit on the porch and relax." He wanted to argue, but the firmness in her voice told him it would be pointless. So he did as she suggested, settling into one of the chairs on the porch and watching the sun set over the mountains. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and purple, and the air cooled to a pleasant temperature. This was his favorite time of day, when the work was done and he could just exist for a while. Zara joined him after a few minutes. carrying 2 tin cups of coffee. She handed him one and settled into the other chair, tucking her feet under her. "I have been thinking," she said after a moment. "About what? About this arrangement we have. About what it means and what it does not mean." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I want to be useful here, Declan. I do not want to be dead weight or a burden. So I was thinking I could take over the cooking and cleaning. Give Carlos a break so he can focus on ranch work with his father. I can also do laundry and mending, and if there is a garden, I can tend to that." "You do not have to earn your keep," Declan said gently. "You are here because I offered you a safe place, not because I expect you to be a servant. I know that. But I need to feel like I am contributing. I need to feel like I have a purpose. After James died, I felt so useless, so adrift. I do not want to feel that way again." Declan understood that need more than he could say. After his parents died, he had thrown himself into work precisely because it gave him a reason to get up in the morning. It gave him something to focus on besides the grief and the loneliness. "All right," he said. "If that is what you want, I am not going to stop you, but I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that if it becomes too much, if you need help or a break, you will say something. I do not want you working yourself into exhaustion trying to prove something." "I promise," she said, and she sounded like she meant it. They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. Declan found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him, the soft sound of her breathing, the way she occasionally shifted in her chair. He wanted to reach over and take her hand to offer some kind of physical comfort, but he held himself back. He had promised her space, and he was going to keep that promise no matter how much he wanted to do otherwise. "Can I ask you something?" Zara said, breaking the silence. "Anything." "Do you ever get lonely out here? It is so isolated. The nearest town is, 15 miles away?" "Silver City is about 12 miles, Declan said. "And yes, I get lonely sometimes, but I also value the peace and quiet. After years of working on other people's ranches, taking orders and dealing with difficult bosses, having my own place feels like freedom, even if that freedom sometimes comes with a side of loneliness." "I can understand that," Zara said. "Freedom has always been something I have wanted but never really had. My father controlled every aspect of my life until I married James, and then James took over that role, though he was kinder about it. I have never just been allowed to be myself, to make my own choices without someone else weighing in." "You can do that here," Declan said. "Make your own choices, I mean. I am not going to tell you how to live your life, Zara. This may be my ranch, but this is your home now, too. Equal partners, remember." She turned to look at him, and in the lamplight spilling from the open door behind them, her eyes were luminous. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For not being like my father or like James. For treating me like a person instead of a possession." "That is a low bar," Declan said with a slight smile. "Maybe, but you would be surprised how many men cannot clear it." They stayed on the porch until the night grew cool and the coyotes started their evening chorus. Then they went inside and Declan banked the fire while Zara lit a lamp to carry to her room. "Good night, Declan," she said from her doorway. "Good night, Zara." He stood there for a long moment after her door closed, listening to the small sounds of her moving around her room. Then he went to his own room, which suddenly felt larger and emptier than it ever had before. Sleep was a long time coming. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable routine. Zara took over the household duties as she had promised, and Declan had to admit the place had never run more smoothly. She was an excellent cook, turning out meals that had Miguel and Carlos singing her praises. She kept the house spotless and organized, and she started a garden near the house where she planted vegetables and herbs. But more than her domestic skills, Declan found himself drawn to her company. She was smart and funny, with a dry wit that caught him off guard and made him laugh. She was also curious about the ranch, asking questions about the cattle and the horses, about the business side of ranching. One morning, about 3 weeks after their arrival, Declan was saddling his horse to ride out and check on the herd when Zara appeared in the barn dressed in riding clothes. "Can I come with you?" she asked. "I would like to see more of the ranch, and I am going stir-crazy being around the house all day." "You know how to ride?" Declan asked. "I am a bit rusty, but yes. James taught me when we first got married. We used to ride together before things got difficult." Declan saddled a gentle mare named Rosie for her, and they rode out together into the morning sunshine. Zara sat her horse well, her posture relaxed and confident. Declan led her up into the hills where most of the cattle were grazing, pointing out landmarks and explaining how he managed the herd. "How do you keep track of them all?" Zara asked, watching a group of cattle scatter as they approached. "Branding mostly. Each spring we round up the new calves and mark them. It is hard work but necessary. Out here, cattle rustling is still a real problem." They stopped on a ridge that overlooked the entire valley, and Declan dismounted to let the horses rest. Zara joined him, standing at the edge looking out over the land. "It is beautiful here," she said. "I can see why you love it. It gets in your blood," Declan agreed. "The land, the work, the freedom. I cannot imagine living any other way now." Zara was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I think I am starting to understand that. When I first came here, I thought of this as temporary, a stopping point until I figured out what to do with my life. But now I am not so sure. Now it is starting to feel like home." Declan's heart beat faster at her words, but he kept his voice casual. "You are welcome to stay as long as you like, forever if you want." She turned to look at him, and there was something searching in her gaze. "Would you want that, truly? Because I know this marriage was not what you planned. You did it to help me, not because you actually wanted a wife." "Maybe it started that way," Declan admitted. "But things change. People change. You are not a burden, Zara. You are not someone I am stuck with. You are someone I am glad to know." Color rose in her cheeks, and she looked away quickly. "That is kind of you to say. It is not kindness. It is honesty." They stood there for a moment, the tension between them thick enough to taste. Then Zara stepped back, breaking the spell. "We should get back. I promised Carlos I would show him how to make bread today." They rode back to the ranch, but something had shifted between them. Declan could feel it in the way Zara glanced at him when she thought he was not looking, in the way her smile lingered a little longer when he said something that amused her. That evening, after dinner was finished and Miguel and Carlos had retired to the bunkhouse, Declan and Zara found themselves on the porch again. It had become their habit, this evening ritual of sitting together and talking about the day. "Can I tell you something?" Zara said suddenly. "Of course." "I have been angry for so long. Angry at James for dying and leaving me with nothing. Angry at my father for being cruel. Angry at myself for not being stronger, for not seeing the signs that James was in over his head. But lately, the anger has been fading. I wake up in the morning, and instead of dreading the day, I find myself looking forward to it. That is because of you, because of the life you have given me here." Declan felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I am glad you are finding some peace. You deserve it after everything you have been through." "Do you ever think about the future?" Zara asked. "About what your life will look like in 5 years, 10 years? Sometimes I think about expanding the ranch, maybe breeding horses like I have been wanting to. I think about growing old in that house, sitting on this porch and watching the sun set." "Alone?" she asked softly. He turned to look at her, and in the lamplight she was achingly beautiful. "I used to think so, but lately I have been imagining it differently." "How?" "With someone beside me. someone to share it all with. Zara's breath caught, and for a moment Declan thought she might say something. But then she stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the porch. I should go to bed. I have an early morning tomorrow. She disappeared into the house before he could respond, leaving him alone on the porch with his thoughts and a heart that was beating far too fast. The next morning, things were awkward between them. Zara was overly cheerful, talking too fast and keeping herself busy with unnecessary tasks. Declan gave her space, heading out with Miguel to repair some fencing on the far side of the property. The Senora seems troubled, Miguel observed as they worked. It is complicated, Declan said. Love usually is, Miguel replied with a knowing smile. Who said anything about love? Boss, I have eyes. I see the way you look at her, and the way she looks at you when you are not watching. You are both dancing around something neither of you wants to admit. Declan drove a fence post into the ground with more force than necessary. She was clear from the beginning that this was a practical arrangement. She does not want romance or complications. That was then. People change their minds, especially when they realize what they could have if they just took a chance. And what if I take a chance and she rejects me? What if I ruin the friendship we have built? Miguel shrugged. Then you will know. And knowing is better than wondering, trust me. I waited too long to tell my Maria how I felt, and I almost lost her to another man. Don't make the same mistake. Declan thought about Miguel's words all day. That evening, when he returned to the house, he found Zara in the garden, pulling weeds in the fading light. He stood and watched her for a moment, this woman who had come into his life so unexpectedly and changed everything. She looked up and saw him standing there, and a smile crossed her face before she could school her expression into something more neutral. "How was your day?" she asked, standing and brushing dirt from her skirt. "Productive. We got the fence repaired." He paused, then added, "Can we talk?" Something flashed in her eyes, possibly fear, possibly hope. Of course. They walked away from the house, up the small hill behind it where an old oak tree provided shade. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "I have been thinking about what you said last night," Declan began, his heart pounding, "about the future and what it might look like, and I need to be honest with you about something." Zara hugged herself, looking nervous. "All right. This marriage may have started as a way to help you out of a bad situation, but somewhere along the way, it became more than that. For me, at least. I look forward to seeing you every morning. I think about you during the day when I am working. I find excuses to come back to the house just so I can hear your voice or see your smile. And I know I promised you space and no expectations, but I would be lying if I said I did not want more." She stared at him, her eyes wide and her lips slightly parted. More. A real marriage. A real partnership, not just on paper, but in every way that matters. He took a breath, gathering his courage. "I am falling in love with you, Zara. Maybe I have been since that first night in Lordsburg when you opened that door with tears on your face but steel in your voice. I know this is not what you signed up for, and if you do not feel the same way, I will respect that. But I had to tell you. I could not keep it inside anymore." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Declan watched emotions play across Zara's face, too quick to identify. Then, to his surprise, tears started rolling down her cheeks. "Oh God, I am sorry," he said quickly. "I should not have said anything. Please forget I mentioned it. We can go back to how things were." "No," Zara said, her voice thick with tears. "We cannot go back, and I do not want to." She closed the distance between them, reaching up to cup his face with both hands. "I am scared," she whispered. "I am terrified, actually, because I am falling in love with you too, and the last time I loved someone, it ended in disaster. But despite being scared, despite all my fears and doubts, I cannot deny what I feel when I am with you. You make me feel safe. You make me feel valued. You make me feel like I could be happy again." Declan covered her hands with his own, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "You mean it?" "I mean it. I love you, Declan O'Reilly. I love your kindness and your patience. I love the way you treat everyone with respect, from me to Miguel to the horses. I love the way you see the best in people. I love the way you look at me like I am precious." He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her, and she melted against him with a sound that was half sob, half laugh. They stood there under the oak tree as the sun completed its journey below the horizon, holding each other like they were afraid to let go. "Can I kiss you?" Declan asked softly. "Please," Zara breathed. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she met him halfway. Their lips touched gently at first, a tentative exploration. Then the kiss deepened, becoming something more passionate, more urgent. Zara's hand slid into his hair and Declan pulled her even closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Declan rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably go back to the house," he said reluctantly. "Probably," Zara agreed. But neither of them moved. They kissed again and again, until the stars were bright overhead and the night had grown cool. Finally, they walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they reached the porch, Declan turned to her. "I know we have been sleeping in separate rooms, and I am not trying to rush you into anything, but I want you to know that I am here. Whenever you are ready, if you ever are ready, I am here." Zara bit her lip, then said quietly, "What if I told you I was ready now?" His heart stopped. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. I do not want to sleep alone anymore. I want to be with you, truly be with you. Not because I owe you anything or because I think I have to, but because I want to. Because I love you." Declan took her hand and led her inside, through the main room to his bedroom. He lit a lamp with shaking hands, then turned to find her standing in the middle of the room looking nervous but determined. "We can still stop," he said gently. "At any point if you change your mind." "I am not going to change my mind," she said. Then she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Stop being so noble and kiss me again." So he did. The next morning, Declan woke to find Zara curled against his side, her dark hair spread across his chest. Sunlight was streaming through the window, and he could hear the sounds of the ranch coming to life outside. But for this moment, all that mattered was the woman in his arms and the overwhelming sense of rightness that filled him. Zara stirred and opened her eyes, and when she saw him looking at her, she blushed. "Good morning," she murmured. "Good morning." He brushed a strand of hair back from her face. "How are you feeling?" Happy, terrified, hopeful, all at once. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him properly. "Last night was not a mistake, was it? Not even close. Last night was perfect." She leaned down to kiss him, sweet and slow, and Declan felt his whole body respond. They might have stayed there all morning if there had not been a knock on the door. "Boss, you in there? We got a problem with one of the cows." It was Carlos, sounding worried. Declan groaned. "I will be right there." They dressed quickly, stealing kisses between pulling on clothes and boots. When they emerged from the bedroom, Carlos was waiting in the main room, politely pretending not to notice anything unusual, even though Zara coming out of Declan's room made the situation pretty clear. "What is wrong with the cow?" Declan asked. "She is having trouble calving." "My father is with her now, but he said we might need help." Declan grabbed his hat and headed for the door, pausing only to kiss Zara one more time. "I will be back when I can." She caught his hand. "Be careful, always." He was gone for most of the morning, helping Miguel and Carlos with the difficult birth. By the time the calf was safely delivered and the mother was recovering, it was nearly noon. He returned to the house dusty, and tired to find Zara had prepared a proper feast for lunch. "I figured you would be hungry," she said, serving him a plate of fried chicken, potatoes, and fresh biscuits. Miguel and Carlos joined them, and over the meal, Declan noticed the way his men's attitudes toward Zara had shifted. There was a new warmth there, and acceptance. They were no longer treating her as the boss's unexpected wife, but as a true member of their small community. After lunch, as they were clearing the table, Miguel pulled Declan aside. "I am glad you two figured things out," he said quietly. "The house has felt lighter these past few weeks, but today it feels like a real home. That is because of the Senora and because you finally admitted what was in your heart." "You were right," Declan admitted, "about taking chances and not waiting. Thank you for pushing me." "That is what friends are for, boss." The days that followed were some of the happiest of Declan's life. He and Zara grew closer with each passing hour, learning each other's habits and preferences. He learned that she sang softly to herself when she cooked, and that she had a terrible habit of misplacing her hairpins. She learned that he was grumpy before his morning coffee, and that he had a scar on his shoulder from a bull attack that still ached in cold weather. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night. The physical intimacy between them deepened the emotional connection, and Declan found himself more in love with her than he had thought possible. About a month after their relationship had become fully real, a stranger rode into the ranch. Declan was working in the barn when he heard the sound of hoofbeats and emerged to see a well-dressed man on an expensive horse. "Can I help you?" Declan called out, his hand instinctively going to the revolver at his hip. Strangers were always cause for caution in this part of the territory. "I am looking for Zara Vaughn," the man said, dismounting. He was in his 40s with graying hair and an air of authority. "I was told she might be here." Zara emerged from the house at that moment, drawn by the sound of voices. When she saw the man, she stopped dead. "Mr. Patterson, Mrs. Vaughn, or should I say Mrs. O'Reilly, I heard about your recent marriage." He removed his hat and approached her respectfully. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I needed to speak with you about an important matter." "What kind of matter?" Declan asked, moving to stand beside Zara protectively. Patterson pulled some papers from his saddlebag. "I am an attorney from Santa Fe. I have been trying to locate Mrs. O'Reilly for the past 2 months regarding her late husband's estate. You see, there was a life insurance policy that Mr. Vaughn was unaware of. It seems your late husband took it out shortly before his death, naming you as the sole beneficiary." Zara looked stunned. James had life insurance, indeed. A substantial policy, actually, $5,000. Zara swayed slightly, and Declan quickly put his arm around her waist to steady her. $5,000 was a fortune, more than most people made in 10 years of hard work. "I do not understand," Zara said weakly. "James never mentioned anything about insurance." "It appears he took it out secretly, perhaps as a way to protect you if anything happened to him. The company has been holding the payout while they searched for you. I was finally able to track you down through some inquiries in Lordsburg, which is how I learned of your marriage and your current location." Patterson handed her the papers. "Everything is in order. You simply need to sign these forms, and the money will be transferred to your account at the bank in Silver City." Declan felt Zara's hand grip his arm tightly as she took the papers with her other hand. He could see the shock on her face, the disbelief. "Would you like me to explain the details?" Patterson asked gently. "I know this must come as quite a surprise." "Yes, please," Zara managed to say. They invited Patterson into the house, and over coffee he explained the intricacies of the policy. James had taken it out with a company in Philadelphia, paying the premiums out of money Zara had not known about. It was clear he had been trying to provide for her in case something happened to him, a final act of love from a man who had failed at so much else. After Patterson left with the signed papers and a promise that the funds would be available within the week, Zara sat at the table in stunned silence. $5,000, she finally said. I could pay off every debt. I could finally be free of my father completely. You could do anything you want, Declan said quietly, even as his heart began to sink. With that kind of money, she did not need him anymore. She could go anywhere, do anything. She could leave. Zara must have seen something in his expression because she reached across the table to take his hand. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking that you are free now, truly free. You do not have to stay here if you do not want to. You could go to San Francisco, to Denver, anywhere. Start a new life." "Do you want me to leave?" she asked, her voice small. "God, no. But I do not want you to stay just because you feel obligated or because you think you have nowhere else to go. If you stay, I need you to stay because you want to. Because you love me and want to build a life here." Zara stood and moved around the table to sit in his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I am not going anywhere," she said firmly. "This is my home. You are my home. That money means I can contribute to the ranch, help us expand like you have been wanting to. We can get those horses, maybe build a bigger barn. We can build our future together." Relief flooded through him so intensely it made him dizzy. "You are sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything. I love you, Declan. I love this life we are building. I am not running away from that." He kissed her deeply, pouring all his relief and love into it. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless and smiling. "So we are really doing this?" he asked. "Building a life together. We are really doing this," she confirmed. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. With Zara's money, they were able to expand the ranch significantly. They bought a breeding stallion and several quality mares, laying the foundation for the horse breeding operation Declan had dreamed of. They built a second barn and expanded the house, adding a proper dining room and a second bedroom for guests. Miguel and Carlos benefited from the expansion as well. They hired 2 more ranch hands, which meant less work for everyone and better pay all around. The ranch was thriving in a way Declan had never imagined possible. But more than the physical improvements to the ranch, Declan treasured the growth in his relationship with Zara. They had moved past the awkward beginning and the tentative middle phase into something solid and real. They fought occasionally, usually about small things like how to organize the kitchen or whether they needed more chickens. But they always talked through their disagreements and came out stronger on the other side. One evening in early spring, about 7 months after they had first met, Declan found Zara standing at the fence line watching the sunset. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how much my life has changed. A year ago, I was trapped in a failing marriage with no way out. 6 months ago, I thought I was going to end up in a brothel. And now look at me. I have a home I love, work that fulfills me, and a husband who makes me happier than I ever thought possible." "You make it sound like luck," Declan said. "Is it not? The odds of everything working out the way it did, of your cards winning that night, of you being the kind of man who would help a stranger, of us falling in love. It seems like incredible luck. Maybe. Or maybe it was meant to be. Maybe some things are just destined to happen." She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "Do you believe in destiny?" "I did not used to. But then I met you, and now I think maybe I do. Because nothing else explains how perfectly you fit into my life, into my heart." She kissed him softly. "I love you so much. I love you too. More than I can ever properly express." They stood there as the sun dipped below the horizon, wrapped in each other's arms, and Declan felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was what he had been searching for all his life without even knowing it. Not just a partner, but a true companion. Not just love, but the kind of love that made everything else worthwhile. A few weeks later, Zara announced at breakfast that she had something to tell him. She had been acting strangely for a few days, and Declan had been worried she was getting sick. But when she sat him down at the table and took his hands, she was smiling. "I went to see the doctor in Silver City yesterday when I said I was going to shop for supplies," she said. His heart skipped. "Are you all right? Are you sick?" "I am fine. Better than fine, actually. Declan, I am pregnant." For a moment he could not process the words. Then they hit him all at once, and he felt like he had been punched in the chest in the best possible way. "Pregnant? You are sure?" The doctor confirmed it. "I am about 2 months along, which means the baby should arrive in November." Declan stood abruptly, pulling her up with him and spinning her around. She laughed, a joyous sound that filled the whole house. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands. "We are going to have a baby," he said, still not quite believing it. "We are going to have a baby," she confirmed, tears of happiness streaming down her face. He kissed her tenderly, his hands moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. A baby. Their baby. A family they were creating together. It was almost too much happiness to contain. The news spread quickly through the ranch. Miguel and Carlos were thrilled, already making plans to build a cradle and planning what they would teach the child. The other ranch hands congratulated them, and the general atmosphere around the place became even more cheerful than it already had been. As Zara's pregnancy progressed, Declan became almost comically protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy or do any work he deemed too strenuous. She complained about being coddled, but he could tell she secretly enjoyed the attention. In November, during the first cold snap of the season, Zara went into labor. Declan rode to Silver City at breakneck speed to fetch the doctor and the midwife, and for the next 12 hours he paced the porch while Zara labored inside. Miguel and Carlos kept him company, trying to distract him with stories and jokes, but nothing could calm the fear and excitement warring in his chest. Finally, just as the sun was rising on a crisp morning, he heard the sound he had been waiting for. The sharp, angry cry of a newborn baby. The midwife appeared at the door, smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. O'Reilly. You have a son." Declan rushed inside to find Zara propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and when she peeled back the blankets to show him their son, he felt tears sting his eyes. The baby was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. His eyes were squinted shut, and he was still crying lustily, but to Declan, he was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen besides his mother. "You want to hold him?" Zara asked softly. Declan sat carefully on the edge of the bed and let Zara place their son in his arms. The baby was so small, so fragile, and yet he gripped Declan's finger with surprising strength when it was offered. "He is incredible," Declan whispered. "He is perfect." "What should we name him?" Zara asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking down at his son, Declan knew exactly what felt right. "Daniel. After my father, Daniel Miguel O'Reilly." Zara smiled through her tears. "That is perfect, and Miguel will be so honored." When Miguel was invited in to meet his namesake, the tough old cowboy cried openly, holding the baby with gentle hands and whispering a blessing in Spanish. Carlos hovered nearby, looking both terrified and fascinated by the tiny human. The ranch settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. Daniel proved to be a relatively easy baby, sleeping in long stretches and rarely fussing. Zara took to motherhood naturally, and Declan found himself completely smitten with his son. He would spend hours just watching Daniel sleep, marveling at every tiny movement and sound. As Daniel grew, so did the ranch. They continued to expand the horse breeding operation, and Declan's instincts proved sound. Their horses developed a reputation for quality, and they began to attract buyers from across the territory and beyond. When Daniel was 2, Zara became pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to twin girls they named Sarah and Emma. The girls were identical in appearance, but completely different in personality. Sarah was quiet and thoughtful, while Emma was bold and adventurous. The house that had once felt too big for just 2 people was now filled with the sounds of children laughing and playing. Declan and Zara worked together to raise their children with love and values, teaching them the importance of hard work, honesty, and treating others with respect. Miguel and Carlos became like family, uncles to the children who spoiled them shamelessly. Miguel taught Daniel to rope when he was just 5 years old, and Carlos was always ready with stories and games to entertain the girls. Years passed in a happy blur. Daniel grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch and showed a natural talent for working with horses. Sarah developed a passion for reading and learning, always asking questions about the world beyond their valley. Emma was fearless, riding horses before she could properly walk and always getting into some kind of mischief. When Daniel turned 15, Zara discovered she was pregnant once more. This was unexpected, as she was now 40 and had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. But in the spring of 1898, she gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas. Thomas was born during a time of change for the country. The Spanish-American War had just begun, and the world felt both larger and more uncertain than it had when Declan and Zara first met. But on the ranch, life continued much as it always had, with hard work and simple pleasures and the love that held it all together. One evening, when Thomas was about 6 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Declan and Zara found themselves alone on the porch. It had been their habit for 16 years now, this evening time together, and it had become sacred to both of them. "Can you believe it has been 16 years since that night in Lordsburg?" Zara asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it feels like a whole lifetime ago." It was a lifetime ago, in a way. We were different people then. I was so broken, so convinced I would never be happy again. "And now?" Declan asked, though he knew the answer. "Now I am happier than I ever imagined possible." "You gave me that, Declan. You and our children and this life we have built. We gave it to each other," he corrected gently. "I was just existing before you came along. You made me want to really live." She tilted her face up to kiss him, and even after all these years, the touch of her lips still sent warmth flooding through him. "You ever think about that card game?" she asked when they parted. "About how different our lives would be if you had folded instead of playing that hand?" "Sometimes. But then I think about how every choice we make leads us to where we are meant to be. Maybe if I had folded that night, I would have met you some other way. Or maybe we were always meant to find each other, and the cards were just the universe's way of making it happen." "I like that idea," Zara said, "that we were meant to find each other." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sound of their children laughing at something Carlos was telling them, and Declan felt his heart swell with gratitude. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For what?" "For taking a chance on me. For staying when you could have left. For loving me and building this family with me. For being my partner in every way that matters." Zara took his hand and squeezed it. "Thank you for winning that card game. Thank you for being the kind of man who would help a stranger. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. Thank you for every single day of these past 16 years. As they sat there together, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Declan thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with a card game and a desperate situation, with two strangers who had no idea what fate had in store for them. But somewhere between that first awkward meeting and now, they had fallen in love. Not the quick, easy love of storybooks, but the deep, abiding love that came from truly knowing someone, from choosing them every day, from building a life together one moment at a time. Their children grew and eventually started families of their own. Daniel married a rancher's daughter from Silver City and took over the horse breeding side of the operation. Sarah became a teacher, much to everyone's delight but no one's surprise, and married a banker from Lordsburg. Emma, true to her adventurous nature, married a surveyor and traveled all over the territory before settling down on a small ranch near the Arizona border. Thomas, the baby who had come as such a surprise, showed early signs of following in his father's footsteps, with a natural way with animals and a love for ranch life. Declan and Zara aged gracefully together, their hair turning silver and their faces mapping the years with lines that spoke of laughter more than sorrow. They remained each other's best friend and greatest love, and everyone who knew them recognized the deep bond between them. Miguel passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had helped build. Carlos took over his father's role as foreman, running the ranch with the same steady competence and integrity his father had shown. On their 30th anniversary, Declan and Zara took a rare trip away from the ranch, traveling to Santa Fe to see Sarah and her family. As they rode the train through the changing landscape, Zara rested her hand on Declan's leg and smiled at him. 30 years, she said. And I love you more now than I did on that first day. The first day you hated me, Declan reminded her with a grin. I did not hate you. I was terrified and confused and angry at the situation, but I never hated you. I think part of me recognized from the very beginning that you were someone special. I knew you were special the moment you opened that door at the boarding house. Even with tears on your face, you had this strength, this fire. I was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. We were quite the pair, Zara laughed. Two damaged people stumbling into marriage with no idea what we were doing. And look at us now. 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and a ranch that is thriving beyond anything I dreamed possible. We did all right for ourselves, Zara agreed. More than all right, actually. They spent a wonderful week in Santa Fe, playing with their grandchildren and enjoying the more civilized amenities of city life. But both of them were happy to return home to their ranch, to the simple routines and familiar comforts that had defined their life together. As they grew older, they spent more time on that front porch, watching the sun set and talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes their children and grandchildren would join them, and the porch would be full of life and laughter. Other times it was just the two of them, content in each other's presence. When Declan turned 70, his body was showing the wear of decades of hard work. His joints ached in cold weather, and he moved slower than he once had. But his mind was sharp and his heart was full, and he had no regrets about the life he had lived. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching another spectacular sunset, Zara said, "Do you remember what I told you that first night? That I did not believe in love or happy endings? I remember. I was so wrong. This has been the happiest ending I could have imagined. Happier even because I never would have dared to dream of something this good." Declan pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "It is not an ending yet. We still have time, plenty of it if I have anything to say about it. Promise me something, Zara said seriously. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, you will always remember that you are the best thing that ever happened to me. That marrying you, building this life with you, loving you, has been the greatest privilege of my life. I promise, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And I need you to know that winning you in that card game was the luckiest moment of my entire existence. You did not just win my heart before sunrise that first night. You won it completely and forever. They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and the stars began to emerge, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Their love story had started in the most unlikely way, born from desperation and necessity. But it had become something true and lasting, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and the choice to love even when love seemed impossible. The ranch continued to thrive under Daniel's management, and the O'Reilly name became synonymous with quality horses throughout New Mexico and beyond. The house remained full of family, with children and grandchildren visiting often, and eventually great-grandchildren adding their voices to the joyful chaos. Declan lived to see his 80th birthday, surrounded by his huge extended family. Zara, still as beautiful to him at 78 as she had been at 25, sat beside him as he blew out the candles on the cake Emma had made. Looking around at all the faces gathered to celebrate with him, Declan felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life he had been given. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Declan and Zara made their way slowly to the porch one more time. It took them longer now, their movements careful and deliberate, but neither of them would have missed their evening ritual for anything. "Did you have a good birthday?" Zara asked. "The best, though I think I ate too much cake." She laughed, the same warm laugh that had captivated him from the beginning. "You always eat too much cake. That is because your daughters inherited your cooking skills. How am I supposed to resist?" They sat in silence for a while, watching the familiar landscape fade into darkness as night fell. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied, and closer by, crickets had started their evening song. "I have had a good life," Declan said softly. "Better than I deserved." "Do not say that. You deserved every bit of happiness you got. You are a good man, Declan O'Reilly, the best man I have ever known. That is because you make me want to be better. You always have." She took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his in a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. They had held hands like this thousands of times over the years, but it never got old. It never stopped meaning something. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too. Always have, always will." They sat there together until the night grew cool and Zara started to shiver. Then they went inside, to the home they had built together, and climbed into the bed they had shared for so many years. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found their home in each other. Declan passed away peacefully in his sleep 5 years later, at the age of 85. Zara held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering her love one final time. She mourned him deeply, but without regret, knowing they had lived a full and beautiful life together. She lived 3 more years, surrounded by her family who made sure she was never alone. In her final days, propped up in the bed she had shared with Declan, she told her children and grandchildren the story of how she had met their father and grandfather. How he had won her in a card game but had given her freedom. How she had been determined not to love him but had fallen anyway. How they had built a life and a family from the ashes of her old dreams. "Never underestimate the power of kindness," she told them, her voice weak but clear. "Your grandfather showed me kindness when he did not have to, and it changed both our lives. Be kind. Be brave. And when you find love, real love, hold on to it with everything you have. She passed away on a spring morning, with the windows open and the smell of blooming flowers drifting through the house. Her children buried her beside Declan on the hill overlooking the ranch, under the shade of an old oak tree. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and a single line underneath. Together forever, as it was meant to be. The ranch remained in the O'Reilly family for generations, passed down from parent to child. The story of Declan and Zara became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. Their great-great-grandchildren would stand on that same porch where they had spent so many evenings, looking out at the land their ancestors had built, and marvel at the love story that had started it all. Because it really was a remarkable story when you thought about it. A story of two people who met in the worst possible circumstances and created the best possible life. A story of love that started with a card game and grew into something that transcended time and death. A story that proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that true love, once found, can transform everything. The ranch still stood, a testament to their legacy. The horses still ran in the fields, descendants of the breeding stock they had started with so many years ago. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, some family members swore they could feel the presence of Declan and Zara still there, still keeping watch over the home they had built together, still bound by the love that had won them both before that long-ago sunrise.